Welcome to this David Icke Dot Connector videocast. There are conspiracies then. We've been told all this time, not least by the mainstream media, that there are no conspiracies. No one has ever conspired with others to manipulate a particular outcome. That the dictionary definition of a conspiracy, which is two or more people conspiring to bring about an outcome, usually illegal, is actually fantasy. What is it doing in the dictionary when there are no conspiracies? And if you believe in them, then you are a conspiracy theorist and mustn't be taken seriously. Now, in the wake of what has happened to Jeffrey Epstein, it seems the whole planet believes in conspiracies, and so they should. I've been exposing them for 30 years, and I say them. In fact, what I've been exposing is one conspiracy to enslave humanity, which has multiple faces. And one of those faces is a gigantic global paedophile and satanic ring that operates in every country. I've been naming famous names, while they're still alive, by the way, since the 1990s, and exposing how this ring works and to what end. And so I was hardly surprised when first the story broke of the allegations that Epstein was running a child trafficking operation, ring, involving underage girls, minors. And I was certainly not surprised by what happened at the correctional facility in Manhattan, where Epstein was being held pending trial on those charges. The point, however, is that while we need to focus upon individuals, we mustn't miss the forest by focusing on the twigs. These individuals are part of a massive global ring, which I'm going to be talking about today, along with the Epstein story. And it's not going to be short because there's a lot of dots to connect. But stick with me if you can, because it's going to be quite a ride as we see that it's not about dots, it's about connecting them to see the pattern and to see the web. And that web not only relates to pedophilia and Satanism, it relates to the forces that are controlling your life today. When you work for this ring, you are protected by it. That's why so many people have got away with it. Jimmy Savile in Britain, the record-breaking paedophile and procurer of children for the rich and famous, the bit the mainstream media miss, also a Satanist. Paedophilia and Satanism tend to connect, especially at the inner circle levels. When you work for the ring and serve the ring will watch your back until you become a danger to the ring because of your exposure. Then one of two things happens. You're either taken out or you disappear. You might disappear through a faked death, and you live out your life under another identity. This has happened. I mean, this happened with Adolf Hitler at the end of the Second World War. He ended up in South America. It also happened with Joseph Mengele, the angel of death in the concentration camps, who also ended up in South America and also in America. I have spoken to quite a number of people over the years who knew Mengele in America at places like the China Lake Naval Weapons Center in California, the Mojave Desert, where he was a central figure in the infamous mind control operation run by the military and the CIA, etc., called MK Ultra. He operated under a pseudonym called Dr. Green. Now, people have had their deaths faked, and they have therefore been pursued no longer in the public arena because, well, he's dead, isn't he? And there are some people who are saying that Jeffrey Epstein is not dead, that this whole thing was a hoax to get him out, and so he didn't have to appear in court, and all the beans might be spilled on the rich and famous. And we're at a point in this story now where it's too early to rule out anything. The way I investigate things is quite simply, when something happens, I open my mind to all possibility. Anything is possible. And the guide then becomes the evidence. So, as evidence comes to light, that evidence will tick off possibilities. No, it couldn't have happened because of the evidence that's come to light. And eventually, you end up with where the evidence points. And it's too early, like I say, at the moment, to say exactly what happened. But we need to keep open to all possibilities and let the evidence tick them off until we get to the truth. What you don't do is what the mainstream media does with world events, which is to take the official story of what happened and then keep repeating it, and anyone that is investigating on the basis of following evidence rather than preconceived idea is a conspiracy theorist and must be abused and dismissed. But this Epstein situation is so blatant that even the mainstream media now are saying, well, hold on a minute, this don't seem to make sense. So let's go with the widely held theory, and I can understand why completely, that Epstein is dead. And so the question comes, how did it happen? Well, we can start with a man called Colonel Leroy Fletcher Prouty and his guide to assassinations and what to watch for if you're trying to find out what was behind it and who was behind it. He was a man of long experience working with the US security apparatus. He worked with the Office of Strategic Services, the forerunner of the CIA, and established Air Defense Command in 1950. This guy was a big insider. He knew how it worked. Prouty went on to work for the CIA, then led by its notorious serial liar, Allen Dulles. And for 9 years, he served at the Pentagon as briefing officer for the Secretary of Defense, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and chief of special operations. And in his 1973 book, The Secret Team, he said the CIA, quite blatantly true, anyone wants to do the research, is a tool of a high cabal of industrialists and bankers and what I call the hidden hand. So this is what Fletcher Prouty said about the assassination technique. No one has to direct an assassination, he said. It happens. The active role is played secretly by permitting it to happen. This is the greatest single clue. Who has the power to call off or reduce the usual security precautions? Now that Prouty guide to assassination techniques has been proved true again and again and again. With the assassination of President Kennedy, with the assassination of Martin Luther King, over and over again, the usual security is withdrawn to allow the assassination to happen, which would not have been possible had the usual security been in place. And if you relate this to what happened to Jeffrey Epstein, well, it's blatantly obvious that the normal security precautions were withdrawn at precisely the relevant time. Just a coincidence, nothing to worry about. So, on July 23rd, Epstein was found in his cell with marks on his neck. The authorities said the wounds were self-inflicted and a suicide attempt. He apparently said that he'd been beaten up and someone was trying to kill him. He was put on suicide watch, which of course is designed to stop another suicide attempt. And this meant constant surveillance and the removal of anything in the cell that Epstein could use to kill himself. Then, inexplicably, still unexplained, how could they? He was taken off suicide watch and placed in special housing with a cellmate. Cellmate, of course, being another defense against suicide. Then, the day before Epstein was found dead, the cellmate was withdrawn and he was alone in his cell. Now, he was still meant to be checked every 30 minutes, but at the time he was found dead, he hadn't been checked for hours. What was that Fletcher Prouty said? Look at who had the power to withdraw the usual security precautions. Precisely what happened to Epstein. Now, one of the things that's been said this week is that he wasn't checked as a result of prison understaffing. What's the word that comes to mind? Oh yeah, bullshit. This is a massively high-profile prisoner awaiting trial that could implicate very famous and powerful people. And he wasn't checked due to understaffing. There were no cameras in the cell, but there were cameras at this facility in the corridors. So where's the footage? He's apparently claimed to have hanged himself with a bedsheet tied to a bunk bed, according to reports that I've read. But former inmates of this Manhattan facility have said that's impossible, that the sheets are not strong enough for that. And they're not strong enough to avoid suicide attempts. And then we had the autopsy. The medical examiner said afterwards he needs more information. And by the time you see this video, you might have seen an update, and we might know more, but he wants more information. And the Washington Post, quoting anonymous sources, reports that the autopsy revealed that Epstein had bones broken in his neck, including one which they quoted experts as saying was far more likely to relate to homicide by strangulation than to hanging. And one of the people carrying out the autopsy, the independent autopsy, has some interesting connections. Here's the story. Pathologists connected to JFK investigation to conduct autopsy on Epstein. Pathologist Michael Baden, who served as chairman of the House Select Committee on Assassinations Forensic Pathology panel that investigated the assassination of John F. Kennedy, is set to conduct an independent autopsy on Jeffrey Epstein. Epstein's representatives have hired celebrity pathologist Michael Baden to conduct an independent autopsy, and they were allowed to observe the first autopsy, reports the Daily Beast. As chairman of the investigation into the JFK assassination, Baden bolstered the official story that Kennedy was killed by a single bullet, also known as the magic bullet theory, also known by anyone with half a brain on active duty as complete bollocks and utterly impossible. Baden, whose career has revolved around investigating high-profile deaths, also testified at the trials of O.J. Simpson and Phil Spector. Some are wondering whether having him carry out the autopsy is a good idea, given the deluge of conspiracy theories circulating about Epstein's alleged suicide. And then there's Dr. Mark Siegel. He was speaking on Fox News, and Siegel has experience of this facility. He's been there, seen how it works. And this is what he said in an interview this week. It's unusual for autopsy results to be delayed. The prison where Epstein was held had only one suicide in the last 40 years. Why wasn't he being observed by camera? He asked. No one would take a sex offender off suicide watch in these circumstances. No respecting psychiatrist would ever say, okay, he's no longer suicidal, it lingers, he said. Taken off suicide watch after 6 days, never seen that in all my years at practice, it doesn't happen. He could have been transferred to a lockdown ward in a hospital where he would have been under constant surveillance. And he said, this is almost unbelievable that this occurred. Medically, it is inexcusable. And as one person said, everything that could have gone wrong did so. All a coincidence? You must be joking. So what we're looking at with Epstein, as with Jimmy Savile, are gateways to a global cesspit of paedophilia and also Satanism. It involves some of the most powerful, rich, and famous people in the world, many of which I've named in my books. And Savile and Epstein, because of their exposure, were very, very dangerous to this ring because they were a conduit for the truth coming out. So with Savile, there wasn't a problem because he was never exposed until he was dead. Well, not publicly exposed. I'll come to that. But Epstein was being publicly exposed, and thus he was a massive danger. So he had to be removed. He had to be removed by killing him, or he had to be removed by hoaxing his death and spiriting him away. And at the time that he was found in his cell, the court documents had been released, big cache of them, which named, some by name and some by title, people those who were abused by the Epstein ring claimed were involved. Jeffrey Epstein accuser names powerful men in alleged sex ring. In newly unsealed documents, Virginia Giuffre, also called Roberts before, at the time that she was involved in this ring, claims that Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell, who is alleged to have been the procurer of young girls for Epstein, I'm coming to Maxwell and the connections of the Maxwell family as we go along, claims that Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell trafficked her to politicians, princes, and a high-flying financier, among others. A young woman who says that financier Jeffrey Epstein and socialite, little more than socialite, Ghislaine Maxwell, kept her as a sex slave when Giuffre was only 16 years old. She also accused a host of high-powered men of being involved in Epstein's alleged sex trafficking ring, according to unsealed court records. Virginia Giuffre, who says that Epstein and Maxwell trafficked her to powerful people for erotic massages and sex, claimed in depositions in 2016 that Maxwell directed her to have sex with former New Mexico Governor Bill Richardson, Britain's Prince Andrew, whom she has accused before, come to him, wealthy financier Glenn Dubin, former Senator George Mitchell, now deceased, MIT scientist Marvin Minsky, and modeling agent Jean-Luc Brunel, as well as another prince, a foreign president, a well-known prime minister, and the owner of a large hotel chain in France. Many other documents remain sealed. The men deny the claims, as does Ghislaine Maxwell. Giuffre has long claimed that Epstein kept her as his underage sex slave and loaned her out to his famous friends, including Prince Andrew and Harvard law professor Alan Dershowitz, who was also denied her allegations. Dershowitz was part of Epstein's legal team that secured his outrageous plea bargain deal in 2007. Which basically let him off scot-free for charges that should have led to a very, very long prison sentence. Meanwhile, Jean-Luc Brunel, whose MC2 agency represents Naomi Campbell and other models, has previously been accused of supplying underage girls to Epstein, which he has denied. And so we come to Prince Andrew, who flew on Epstein's plane, the Lolita Express. So did Bill Clinton many times. And vacationed with him, this is Andrew, in Thailand, met the financier through Maxwell. The royal has been fighting allegations for years that he caroused with Giuffre when she was underage. The Duke of York and the palace have vehemently denied the claims. Several years ago, Giuffre told the Mail on Sunday that Epstein loaned her out to the prince and other famous friends for sex, and claimed, this is absolutely vital, I'm going to come more into this as we go along, also claimed that she had to report back with potential blackmail material for Epstein. Because this Epstein operation was a blackmail operation to control the actions of politicians and other influential people. During her first alleged rendezvous with the prince, Gouffret claimed that Maxwell had asked Andrew how old he thought I was, and he guessed 17, and they all kind of laughed about it. And Ghislaine made a joke that I was getting too old for Jeffrey. She said he'll soon have to trade her in. And in the Black Book that's come to light of Jeffrey Epstein's contacts are people like Tony Blair, former Prime Minister of Britain, his one-time Svengali, guy called Peter Mandelson, of course Bill Clinton and Hillary Clinton, and of course the Clinton body count, people who knew something on the Clintons that suddenly were no longer with us, is over the horizon now. I was exposing that in a book called And the Truth Shall Set You Free, which I wrote in 1994. It was long enough to be called The Body Count then. And if you want to see the cesspit, that is the Clintons, well, The Biggest Secret is a place to look. And then there is this psychopath in Saudi Arabia, this crown prince, Mohammed bin Salman, you know, the guy who was behind the bone saw cutting up of the journalist Jamal Khashoggi. Nice man. Who Epstein said visited him many times. So you see, this is a global ring, not just one paedophile operating alone. And in terms of Prince Andrew, this is a very telling quote by Gouffret's lawyer about Andrew. The court document also contains a photo which shows Andrew with his hand around Miss Gouffret's bare waist while she was a minor child, while posing with Ghislaine Maxwell inside Maxwell's house in London. Most people will have seen this picture now. It's been widely circulated. The lawyers said in the court papers, this particular photograph corroborates Miss Gouffret's claims that there is no other reasonable explanation why an American child should be in the company of adults not her kin in the London house owned by the girlfriend of a now convicted sex offender. Something you can hardly argue with, because it's true. And I'm going to come to the British royal family when I get to Jimmy Savile. And so you have this situation where all these people, and a lot more, face the possibility, indeed increasingly the probability, of being exposed publicly in court, who really didn't want Epstein giving evidence, and suddenly Epstein's no longer with us. But there's a bigger picture here. What this ring does from its controlling core is to use paedophilia to compromise people it wants to control, be they presidents or prime ministers or anyone of political and other influence who can make decisions that this cabal wants them to make to advance its agenda. And this blackmail operation involving honey traps, as they're called, and paedophilia is a speciality of the Israeli intelligence operation Mossad, as it is with the CIA and British intelligence. And once they have them on film, that island mansion of Epstein, the Virgin Islands, would have been sorted out with cameras and audio. Once that happened, then these people do as they're told in terms of political and other decisions, or it's revealed. This is how this cabal, one way that this cabal controls global events and political decisions. And so let's look at the Mossad connections. And it's worth pointing out again that this is a web. And if you go deep enough into the web to the level of cabal control, Mossad is the CIA, is British intelligence, is Australian intelligence and Canadian intelligence and French intelligence. And therefore, it's not just a Mossad operation, though they would have been centrally involved because of Epstein's background, but it's a web operation. So there are, of course, massive questions about where Epstein's money came from. He's supposed to be running a hedge fund and making phenomenal amounts of money, but what we know about the hedge fund is basically zero. We do know that he was connected in this fund to a guy called Leslie Wexner, who I'll come to. Now, Epstein was Jewish and a Zionist and had big connections to Israeli politicians, to the military, and to the intelligence community, including Ehud Barak, who is a former prime minister. He's now running and challenging Netanyahu in the upcoming Israeli elections, former head of the Israel Defense Forces, and has been connected to Epstein. Barak was caught on camera covering his face as he went into Epstein's house in New York in the same period that, quote, a large number of young women entered the house. So Epstein had big connections, and there's a reason for that. He was working for him. And it also involves this web connecting to Epstein, something called the mega group. And this mega group connects us into Donald Trump, also at least one time friend of Epstein. And with this video, I've added underneath a link to an article at Mint Press News written by Whitney Webb, very good writer and investigator. And I really do recommend that you read it to get some of the deep connections involving Epstein and this mega group and the connections to that group. Now, this is just part of that article, and this is a section headed "The Origins of the Mega Group." The Mega Group, a secretive group of billionaires, was formed in 1991 by Charles Bronfman and Leslie Wexner, this guy connected to the financial operations of Epstein. Wexner, of whom had received considerable media scrutiny following the July arrest of his former protege, Jeffrey Epstein, media profiles of the group painted as, quote, a loosely organized club of 20 of the nation's wealthiest and most influential Jewish businessmen, focused on philanthropy and Jewishness, quote, with membership dues upwards of $30,000 a year. Yet several of its most prominent members, the article says, have ties to organized crime, because organized crime is part of this web. Been writing about this for years, decades. Megagroup members founded and or closely associated with some of the most well-known pro-Israeli organizations. For instance, members Charles Bronfman and Michael Steinhardt formed Birthright Taglit with the backing of the then and current Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Steinhardt, an atheist, has stated that his motivation in helping to found the group was to advance his own belief that devotion to and faith in the State of Israel should serve as a, quote, substitute for Jewish theology. In other words, these people don't believe in Judaism. Nothing to do with Judaism. Nothing to do with the vast majority, overwhelming majority of Jewish people. This is a very different entity to, quote, Jewish people. Other well-known groups associated with the megagroup include the World Jewish Congress, whose past president Edgar Bronfman and current president Ronald Lauder of the Estee Lauder family are both megagroup members, and B'nai B'rith, particularly its spin-off known as the Anti-Defamation League, or ADL. This is the organization that goes around trying to silence people who criticize Israel, because that's what it was created to do. The Bronfman brothers were major donors to the ADL, with Edgar Bronfman serving as the ADL's honorary national vice chair for several years. In addition, megagroup members have also been key players in the pro-Israel lobby in the United States. For instance, Max Fisher of the megagroup founded the National Jewish Coalition, now known as the Republican Jewish Coalition, the main pro-Israel neoconservative political lobbying group known for its support of hawkish policies like bombing Arab countries in the Middle East, and whose current chief patrons, Sheldon Adelson and Bernard Marcus, are among Donald Trump's top donors. In terms of Adelson, the top donor. So you can see the scale of this web that comes out from Epstein. He's a gateway to the cesspit, just like Savile was. That's why they had to shut it down. Now, I've been writing in my books for years about the use of paedophilia to blackmail politicians and others to do the bidding of this cabal. And a New York Times columnist said that Epstein told him that he had dirt on some of the Silicon Valley elite. This is how it works. Are you going to censor these people who are exposing us? Oh, well, what freedom is about? Can I just show you something? Oh, yeah, well, let's censor them. I agree with that. That's how it works. And Virginia Roberts, now Virginia Giuffre, said that she was told to report back to Epstein with potential blackmail material, as I've said earlier, including on Prince Andrew. And I've heard it asked this week, who exactly is Ghislaine Maxwell, the alleged madam and procurer of young girls for Epstein's ring. Well, I can tell you who her father was. He was a Mossad agent called Bob Maxwell. The crooked, mega, stupendously crooked businessman and media owner and British MP who worked for Mossad for years. This has been exposed by a number of insiders, including this man, Victor Ostrowski, who was a former Mossad agent. He wrote a couple of books. This is the second one, The Other Side of Deception, in which he describes how Maxwell was a Mossad agent in a number of areas. And then when he became a liability, he says, Mossad murdered him on his yacht in 1991 in an accident, and the yacht was called the Lady Ghislaine, synchronistically. And so Maxwell, he was of Czechoslovakian descent. He was born Jan Ludwig Hock. And he was known as the bouncing Czech, because his Czechs usually did. And he was funded by Mossad to buy the Daily Mirror newspaper in Britain. And when he became a liability, because things were falling apart, just like Epstein was a liability, they killed him. And Mossad and the Israeli government, after killing their Mossad agent, Bob Maxwell, then gave him a hero's funeral on the Mount of Olives in Jerusalem, which is described as the most ancient and important Jewish cemetery in Jerusalem. The chief of the Israeli military at the time was Ehud Barak, later became prime minister and a friend and associate of Jeffrey Epstein. So Mossad, the CIA, have a stunning history of taking out people who become a problem to them, just as British intelligence do, and of compromising targets through paedophilia. And let's not forget either that Jimmy Savile had very close ties also to Israel. I'm going to come to Savile and the connections to the royal family of Prince Andrew, in a second. But one of the points I've been making over the years is that at the inner core of the paedophile network, it fuses into the satanic ritual sacrifice network. And this is an interesting story in a newspaper this week. It was an article that was alongside, by the way, another one, which said that after Epstein's death, the FBI raided Epstein's island in the Virgin Islands, which is known locally as Paedophile Island. Why are they raiding the island after he died and not raiding it as part of the investigation into Epstein from day one? Look at all this time that has passed that allows evidence to be destroyed. As I said in last week's videocast, the FBI is one of the most corrupt organizations on planet Earth. But it's just a coincidence. Anyway, this other story said this. There is one part of Little St. James, this is Epstein's Island, that remains a complete mystery. It is a curious building on the southwest headland of the island, that some suspect may represent the heart of Epstein's sordid sex trafficking activities. Measuring 30 foot square and about 30 foot high, the box-like building, cube, had a golden dome until it was thought to have been blown off in a storm. The walls are painted in thick blue and white stripes, and there is a locking bar placed across one of the doors. Surrounding the building is a terrace featuring some sort of labyrinthine pattern. So the article asks, what exactly is this curious building for? It says, because the structure looks like a temple, you don't have to be the biggest conspiracy theorist on the planet to suppose it is a place where Epstein carried out his sexual abuse in an almost ritualistic fashion. These people, this web, is obsessed with ritual. That's why Satanism is all about ritual. They've turned human society into a series of repeating rituals, if you look at it. As one Chicago-based builder told the website Business Insider, those locking bars seem positively sinister. Someone else said, what makes it peculiar is that if you wanted to keep people out, the bar would be placed inside the building, but the locking bar appears to be placed on the outside as if it were intended to lock people in. The article says, add this to the fact that the room is supposedly soundproofed and it is hard not to feel a chill about the place. These people are not like the rest of us. And until the human race in general starts to understand that and stops relating what they would do to what the general population would do, they'll never understand the scale of what we're dealing with here. And the true level of psychopath that is running our world. So, Jimmy Savile. We've seen the connections of Prince Andrew to Epstein. And just a little bit of background for people around the world who have not come across this in any detail about Jimmy Savile. Jimmy Savile became famous in Britain in the 1960s as a disc jockey. He used to play records on the radio. He was a strange man and did a program called Jim Will Fix It, where he interacted with children for the BBC. And even when his, quote, entertainment career ended, he still had a phenomenal income, just like Epstein. And he had many, many houses, he had big cars and all the rest of it, with no obvious means of income. And after he died in 2011, and a television documentary exposed him and all hell broke loose for a short time, he was exposed as a record-breaking paedophile. But what was missed is that he was a Satanist, or that was mentioned here and there, but he was also a procurer of children for the rich and famous. And when you do that, and you're not exposed and therefore a danger to wider exposure like Epstein, your back is watched while you're serving the ring by procuring children. In my book, The Perception Deception, I blow all this apart, the whole Savile background, all of it. And so Savile was known about by the police. This has come to light. He was questioned here and there. They covered up for him. And if the police knew what he was doing, in terms of paedophilia, at least, then the British intelligence security agencies knew. Of course they did. Some of their heads have been paedophiles. And special branch, police special branch would have known. And yet, Savile, by his own words, was invited into the inner circle of the British royal family. He says originally in the 60s by Lord Mountbatten. And anyone that's investigated paedophilia in Britain will know that he is a known paedophile, Mountbatten, or was. And Savile, a dishevelled disc jockey and very strange man, stayed in the inner core of the British royal family virtually till his death. He was a close friend of Prince Charles until his death. Mountbatten was a mentor of Prince Charles and also, to an extent, Prince Philip. And I was told in the 1990s by a 9-year close friend of Princess Diana about Savile's involvement with the British royal family. Diana couldn't stand him, thought he was horrible and sleazy. Well, she was a good judge of that. And Savile was actually used as a go-between Diana and Charles when they were having problems with their marriage. What, a disc jockey? You cannot go anywhere near the British royal family unless the intelligence and security agencies and special branch, etc., know all about you. And here we have a record-breaking paedophile and procurer of children for the rich and famous, disc jockey, in the inner bosom of the British royal family for decades. And they didn't know? Charles didn't know? Oh, God, there's a group of pigs just flown past the window. And so, what's been claimed in these court papers about Prince Andrew is par for the bloody course. And why has the British media and the British establishment, it's a rhetorical question, by the way, allowed the royal family to get away with the Savile connections unscathed? And then we have another friend of Jimmy Savile, Margaret Thatcher, the Iron Lady, whose father was a known paedophile in Grantham. And it was Thatcher's cabinet, a number of members of the Thatcher cabinet, that were claimed to be involved in the Westminster paedophile ring, which came to light in the wake of the Savile revelations and has now been shut down. And it was through public pressure that the then Home Secretary, Theresa May, set up a inquiry into elite paedophilia and the Westminster Ring and many other things, who, this is Theresa May, appointed two heads of that inquiry that were so blatantly subject to conflicts of interest that they had to step down. And what that did was put a massive amount of time between the revelations, when it was at the focus of public attention, and the inquiry. It's still going on, but quietly, overwhelmingly. And then we've had recently a guy called Carl Beach, which was someone who was given the code name Nick, who's just been sentenced to, I think it's 18 years in prison, for perverting the course of justice by naming people who he said abused him, some of which have never been named to me, and two of which have been named to me many, many times. That's why I went public with them in my books while they were still alive. The former Prime Minister Edward Heath and the former Thatcher Minister Leon Britton. And what's happened is this Cole Beach, Nick, has been exposed as a fantasist, and this has served the interests of the Ring perfectly. Because the media, in their outrage, and no one should be named if it's not true, absolutely not, but in their outrage, have created a situation where other people, what they call survivors of abuse, will be far more reluctant to come out now. And even more so, the police, who've been demolished by the media over the Cole Beach story because they believed him for a while, will be very, very reluctant to go down this road again with people who are genuine. And the point is, while Beach was naming people that have never been named to me, but naming two that absolutely have over and over again, Heath and Britton, while he was naming them, so many other people, genuine people, who've talked to me over the years and talked to other people too, including a Wiltshire police inquiry into Heath allegations of paedophilia, which happened something like 17 years after I named him in The Biggest Secret, while he was still alive, still an MP. The passage was read to him by what passes for a journalist. And all he said was, David Icke must be mad. Nothing else happened. And then you have Thatcher's money man and Svengali, this guy, Lord Alistair McAlpine, who came to prominence in the wake of the Jimmy Savile allegations, revelations, not allegations, and was not named as a paedophile, but one or two people indicated it. I named him as a paedophile in The Biggest Secret that was published in 1998. And we're talking about these revelations and hints about McAlpine post Savile's death in 2011. And the BBC didn't name him, and yet gave him a massive payout for libel. ITV didn't name him, but gave him a massive payout for libel. He took the wife of the Speaker of the House of Commons to court and got a libel payout. Others settled out of court who said things on social media, including a Guardian excuse for a journalist called George Monbiot. And I'd named him as a paedophile in a book all those years before in 1998 and repeated that on the internet at the time that the revelations came to light. What did McAlpine do to me? Nothing. And if anyone wants proof of the paedophiles involved in the Thatcher government and the Westminster paedophile ring, which exists and still exists today, then they should look no further than an MP for Chester called Peter Morrison. Peter Morrison was a very close Thatcher aide from the time, indeed before the time she became leader of the Conservative Party, all the way through when she was Prime Minister. And she knew, and the inner circle, at least an outer circle of the Conservative Party, knew Peter Morrison was a paedophile. Here's a book, The Diaries of Edwina Currie, who was a minister in the Thatcher government at one point. Edwina Currie, Diaries 1987 to 1992. And we turn to an entry in her diary in 1990, House of Commons, Tuesday, 24 July, 11:15 p.m. Quote, "One appointment in the recent reshuffle by Thatcher has attracted a lot of gossip and could be very dangerous," she wrote. "Peter Morrison has become the Prime Minister's PPS, Principal Private Secretary, I don't know what they call that, or Parliamentary Private Secretary, I don't know, one of the two. It was a close aid job, put it that way. Now he's what they call a noted paedophile, with a liking for young boys. He admitted as much to Norman Tebbit when he became deputy chairman of the party. Norman Tebbit was chairman at the time. But added, however, I'm very discreet. So he's telling Tebbit that he's a paedophile, but he's very discreet. Oh, well, that's all right then. You can do it, but just don't get caught. And Edwina Currie says in her diary, and he must be. Edwina, why didn't you point this out at the time? She either knows, she's talking about Thatcher here, she either knows and is taking a chance or doesn't. Either way, it is a really dumb move. Teresa Gorman told me, she's another MP, this evening in a taxi coming back from a drinks party at the BBC, that she inherited Morrison's woman agent, who claimed to have been offered money to keep quiet about his activities. It scares me, as all the press know. And as we get closer to the election, someone is going to make trouble very close to her, Thatcher, indeed. These people know the paedophiles. They know there's a Westminster paedophile ring. Just like they know there's a Capitol Hill ring. Part of the wider ring in America. They're lying to you. And the mainstream media is far more interested in using the fantasist Carl Beach to destroy any idea of a Westminster paedophile ring than it is investigating the fact that it exists. This world is nothing like we think it is. And people have said I'm crazy and all this stuff, and all that happens is what I've said in the past just keeps turning out to be true, because it is. We have a cabal that is psychopathic and satanic, that is dictating world events and is dictating your life in increasingly fine detail. And we need to open our minds to it very fast, because its agenda for humanity is horrific. Do you think people that sacrifice children on altars and abuse little kids, destroy their lives, kill them even, could give a damn about humanity and what's best for the human race? This is the mentality we're dealing with. And it's time we faced it. And it's time the media grew a pair. It doesn't hurt, honest. If people want to know the scale of what's going on in this world, then this book, to be published on September the 11th, but it's not only about September the 11th, The Trigger, the most controversial and the most explosive book of modern times, will tell you what is really going on and who was really behind 9/11. And it weren't 19 hijackers who struggled to fly one-engine planes and suddenly manifest the ability to fly big commercial jets in ways that professional pilots said they would struggle to do. The veil is lifting despite all the censorship. You know why? Because human credulity is opening to the true scale of what is happening in this world. And it ain't what they're telling us.